Hey there, welcome to another episode of Digging In. Today we're going to start digging into Psalm 28. Psalm 28 is a psalm that helps us maybe express what it is that we might go through when we are on the receiving end of human sinfulness and human brokenness. Probably all of us have had experiences where, because of other people's actions or behaviors, we find ourselves in a place where we feel alone and desperate. And in this case, Psalm 28 reflects an experience in which other people have been deceptive towards the writer of the psalm. And so he puts that into words. He puts language to that experience that can help us. So I'm going to put the text up on the screen so that we can look at it together. And then we'll get started. Our first our first step in looking at a psalm or looking at any text is to read through the text without trying to study it in any way. We're not trying to analyze the text yet. Our first step is, I think, always to prayerfully read through the psalm, listen carefully to it, and really what we're hoping to do is to have the words hit us. We might be in the back of our minds asking ourselves a couple questions. We might be asking, what do I notice here about my own, what does this text tell me about my own brokenness, my own sinfulness? We might be paying attention to, what does God do? How does God provide for a solution? And what does he call me to do in response? Those questions maybe are in the back of our mind. But before we do any real analytical work, we ought to just be prayerfully reading through the text and seeing what stands out to us. But once we've done that, if we're going to do a good study of it, one of the things we'll do is we'll break the text down. And that's what we're going to do here in our first step. So I have the text in front of us, Psalm 28, and we're going to start off. The psalm starts off, it names the psalmist, so we know it's from David. We can put that kind of up here. Not that that's unimportant, but we're going to just put that a little bit kind of in a place where we can recognize that it's a title of the psalm, or pardon me, the author of the psalm. Now we get started. And again, we're looking to break the text up into individual phrases that will help us to notice things like the flow of thought, or parallel phrases, or the way that one line modifies another. That's going to help us when we want to analyze and really dig into the text. So, to you, O Lord, I call my rock. And then the next phrase, so that's an expression, and so that's an indicative, that's a statement of what is. This is what I'm doing. But now the psalmist changes, be not deaf. And just maybe for clarity, or we're going to put that verb next to this one, I call and be not deaf. So it goes from an indicative to an imperative, which is a way of already saying, I'm calling to you, I'm counting on you, so don't ignore me. Because if you do, lest, if you be silent, now every time there's a word if, that's a conditional sentence. If this, then that. If this happens, then that will follow. If you be silent, I become like those who go down to the pit. So you already see the meaning here. If God doesn't answer me, then I'm going to be like all those other people that pay no attention to God and they end up down in the pit. So another imperative. So we have already be not deaf. Hear the voice of my pleas for mercy. And then that modifies it. Hear the voice when I cry. And we'll line up the first person pronoun here. My pleas when I cry to you for help. And then a parallel phrase. It's, again, Hebrew poetry is famous for its parallelism. When I lift up my hands toward your most holy sanctuary. Maybe we'll do this. We'll put this over here, the you and the your. When I cry to you for help, when I lift up my hands toward your most holy sanctuary. That maybe helps us see that crying to God for help and lifting up my hands towards your sanctuary. Those maybe are parallel ideas. Again, we're at this point, we're not locked into any of these conclusions. We're just making observations. Maybe we go back later and notice different things and we can change this around. We have the freedom to do that as we're studying the text. Do not drag me off with the wicked. Here's another imperative, right? Maybe so because it's another imperative, maybe we'll put this over here. So it follows this indicative. Do not, I call to you, I'm calling out to God. So don't be deaf, hear my voice, don't drag me off with the wicked. And then I noticed that there's several types of people here with workers of evil, and then who speak peace with their neighbors while evil is in their hearts. I want to line up evil and peace because that's contrastive, isn't it? That's they're speaking peace, but in their hearts is evil. Another imperative, give an imperative, remember, I should have maybe explained this earlier. An imperative is just a command. It's telling someone to do something, which, by the way, there's a level of boldness here in prayer that maybe we aren't always used to. The psalmist is not timid. He's actually demanding that God do this. That's boldness, isn't it? Give to them according to their work, according to the evil of their deeds. Give to them according to the work of their hands. There we go. Get that nicely lined up. It all just follows really, really parallel, doesn't it? Give to them according to their work, according to their evil, to the evil of their deeds. Maybe we tweak that just a little bit. According to the work of their hands. Oops. Render them their due reward. Because they do not regard the works of the Lord, um, or the works of his hands, he will tear them down. And then the parallel phrase to that is build them up no more. So tearing down and building up no more. Um, Now, the psalm takes a very noticeable change in tone here. Blessed be the Lord, for he has heard the voice of my pleas for mercy. So there's sort of a before and after thing going on here, isn't there? There's this earlier part where the psalmist is clearly in some trouble. And then there's the after part where he's asked God to do something about it to help him, and now God has. For he's heard the voice of my pleas for mercy. So that's sort of a parallel to what we hear up here. Don't be deaf to me. Hear my pleas, hear the voice of my pleas. Oh, and we find out he has. The Lord has heard the voice of my pleas. The Lord is my strength, and my shield. In him my heart trusts, and I am helped in my heart. We'll match up there the word heart. I am helped. My heart exults with my song. I think I'm getting this not quite right. My shield is in him. Let's do it this way. Now this makes sense. My shield, my shield is in him. My heart trusts, and I am helped. My heart exults, and with my song, I give thanks to him. The Lord is the strength of his people. He is the saving refuge, of his anointed. So again, we kind of see parallel phrases. He's the strength and the saving refuge, strength of his people, saving refuge of his anointed. And then the concluding call to praise, oh, save your people. By the way, that's Hebrew, that word I'm pretty sure, I have to check it, but I'm pretty sure it's the word Hosanna. Save your people and bless Oops. I don't like this in Logos when it does this. It doesn't always let me lay the text out quite as I want on the first try. Be their shepherd. Ah, see? Come on. And carry them forever. All right, so we've given ourselves a pretty good flow of the text. We've kind of been able to lay out exactly what the text is. We've kind of followed that before and after format. The psalmist is in trouble, and then we don't exactly know how God answers the prayer. We don't know specifics, but it's clear that he does, because then the psalmist ends with this expression of thanks to God. And so there's that nice progression there. That's going to help us understand the message of the text. All right. Well, listen, we've gotten ourselves to the first part of this text. The next step, which we'll do in momentarily, is we're going to unpack the depth of each of the language. We're going to try to trace the meaning and the message of the text, and so we'll do that, and we'll pick it up here shortly. All right, we are back. We've broken down our text. Now it's time to move into the next step of doing a good Bible study, and that is to dig deeper into the language and the structure and the meaning of the text. Our goal here is to first understand, what did the passage mean then and there? What did the original author want to get across to the very first people who would have been hearing or speaking this text? Once we do that, then we're prepared to apply it to the here and now, to our life today. But we can't really do that until we first know what the message was for the original author. So I'm going to put my screen up, and uh, we're going to start looking at some of the way this text is broken down. All right, here we go. One of the things that I notice in this text is that it's broken really into two main parts. Let me kind of just sketch that out for us here. Now, some of this you'll kind of have to just think back to what we looked at when we broke the text down, but this is a prayer for help. We're going to just call it that, real simple. And then down here, we'll get to that in a minute. It's thankfulness for God's answer. Or maybe we'll just to stay consistent, oops, we'll say thankfulness for help. Or if we really want to get good, prayer for God's help, thankfulness for God's help. Oops. There we go. That looks terrible, but it's going to help us actually think about the structure of the text and kind of the meaning of it. Now, when I went through this text again, I kind of just reviewed it again. I noticed this prayer for help actually falls into three, what I think are three little subsections. I'm just going to draw them out like this. Whoops. Oh, I hate when it does this. All right, here we go. Now, let's try this again. Here we go. Three subsections. The first one is this, and then the second one is this. Um, Actually, no, wait, I'm going to change that just a little bit. Let me erase this one here. The second one is this, and then the third one is this. Now, how do I come to that conclusion? Well, if I look at this first section, you'll notice there's quite a number of verbs that deal with whether or not God is listening. So I call, and then a command, do not be deaf, lest if you be silent. Right? So these are again all words that have to do with speaking and listening. The voice, I cry, and lift up my hands. That's not directly speaking and listening. At least it doesn't seem that way, although I think I'm going to make the case that actually it is. The other thing, so that all of these have to do with God, with whether or not God is listening. So let's just kind of write that in, listen, and we'll exclamation point. And again, we notice that God is the psalmist is basically saying you. He's speaking to God. And then we talked about this in a recent video. You can look at the pronouns, the you and me, because that determines who is speaking to whom. Um, so we got my, me, um, my hands, your most holy, you. So this is clearly between the psalmist and God. The second part, do not drag me off with the wicked, um, and workers of evil. Now there's some parallelism here, right? Wicked and workers of evil, but you'll notice that there's actually a repetition. And I'm going to just kind of highlight this here. If we look at this phrase, workers of evil, according to their work of their hands, um, and they don't regard the works of the Lord or the work of his hands. So there's, again, we want to just make a little note that there's a contrast here between the work, evil work, and God's work. And the psalmist makes that point by using the same language, their work, the evil of their deeds, the work of their hands, and then the works of the Lord and the works of his hands. That's just a way of kind of drawing our attention to that contrast. One of the problems with wicked people is that they practice evil with their hands, but they disregard the works of God's hands. We also notice, and maybe I'll just draw your attention to that too, that the language of hands is also repeated. We first see that. Oops, I didn't mean to scribble that out. Let's erase that and try it with a highlighter pen instead. So the work of I lift up my hands, and then the evil of their hands, and the work of his hands, God's hands. Um, there's again kind of this this idea. How do you understand what is evil and what is wickedness in the world? And the psalmist uses the language of work of their hands. It gives you the sense that this is something that a person does. It's maybe an act of violence. It's maybe an act of aggression of some kind. Um, there's one more that I wanted to just emphasize here, and that is a phrase here, voice. Oops, I didn't mean to do that in purple. I'm actually going to fix that because um, I want it in green, actually. So hear the voice of my pleas for mercy. Now, I draw your attention to that because later, the voice of my pleas for mercy, that sentence is repeated almost word for word. Now, why does that matter? Because obviously we're meant to make a connection. Now, we're not quite in this second section yet, which we'll get to, but what we see is that when the psalmist is in trouble, he uses the language here, voice of my pleas for mercy, and then by repeating it later on, he's showing that God has answered the very prayer that he lifted up before God. He's pretty specific about that. And so the psalmist can actually set up a pretty nice, break in the psalm. Here's where he's, the voice of my pleas for mercy, and then he heard the voice of my pleas for mercy. You might also add, heard and hear. So that's kind of repeated. This language is repeated. Um, as a way of showing first the psalmist cries and then God answers. And so it just kind of works like that. Um, so here we are. Here's listen. Now I'm sort of circling around. I realize I'm kind of all over the place here, but that's sort of how, I just kind of follow rabbit trails as they come up. But so here's the first thing, listen. And then the second part of the prayer is don't let me fall in with the wicked. So maybe he knows, maybe the psalmist is aware that he's prone to temptation. Maybe he's afraid of being just kind of lumped in with them somehow. But he doesn't want to be associated with the wicked people. There's one more word we're going to use. Oh, I don't know. Let's use kind of a dark blue to highlight here. Um, Workers of evil. Evil is in their heart. the evil of their deeds. So we kind of see there's clearly an emphasis on these people who are pretty nasty, and he doesn't want to get associated with them, and he doesn't want to fall prey to them. It's maybe a little bit of both. It seems that, the problem is he's dealing with people who are speaking malicious, even if on the surface they actually look good and kind. The third part of the psalmist's prayer is here where and we can notice it according to their work, according to the evil, according to the work of their hands. What does all of that have in common? Well, it's the third part of the prayer is a prayer for justice. Right. The psalmist wants the people who are acting aggressively and acting in a way that's, nasty and destructive and harmful. He wants them to be repaid for that. He wants them to be punished for that somehow. Um, so one more thing, and I'm going to just highlight it, and then I'm actually gonna erase a lot of this, and then we're going to look at the second part of the psalm. But before we do that, I think it's good to notice, to highlight here right here. It's kind of a word that got buried under all my writing, but evil is in their hearts. So that's important because it's going to set up a contrast for us. So the psalmist is dealing with people who are working evil. They're in their hearts, they're malicious. Even if we see on the surface they speak peace with their neighbors, but they're workers of evil. So the psalmist is dealing with people who have it in for him one way or the other, and it's not entirely clear how, at least not to me, not yet. Maybe we'll find that out later. But he's he's asking for God's help and protection. He's asking that God would preserve him in the face of that, and he's asking that God would do justice. Now, let's move to the second part of the psalm. I'm going to scroll up a little bit, and now we're going to look just at the second half of the psalm, which is here, and it's God's answer for help. And once again, we see one of the things we looked at, and we already highlighted this, but the voice of my pleas for mercy, right? We looked at that in the early part of the prayer, and we looked at the idea of God hearing that cry. I'm just going to kind of do that so we remember that the psalmist is now coming back to the very prayer that he made before God. And he's actually delighting in the fact that God actually heard that prayer and he heard that response. Um, there's another, I think we highlighted in blue the idea of God being a helper. And we see that again here. I am helped because earlier again, the psalmist, guess what he did? He prayed for God's help. That's in verse 2. One more thing. The psalmist, remember, I just kind of said this about how the psalmist says, my heart trusts in him, and I am helped. My heart exults, and with my song I give thanks to him. Remember, we said earlier, again, we said that and actually, yeah, we can even highlight it just to make the point, because up here, we have hearts, and I think there was one more time. Well, maybe not. Maybe it was just the one. But the point being that earlier the psalmist is dealing with people who have evil in their hearts. And so he's contrasting himself. He's really saying, you know, I'm not like that. I'm going to trust in the Lord. Now we have to unpack that a little further, which we'll do. Um, one final, well, maybe a couple final things. The idea of God being strength. Look at this. You maybe noticed this. The Lord is the strength of his people. And then oh yeah, there's the Lord is my strength. So twice the psalmist repeats this idea here. The Lord is the strength, the Lord is my strength. Um, and therefore he trusts, and the Lord is the strength of his people. And so, and I noticed this too. I don't think I highlighted this when I was doing it on my own. So, but I'm going to do it here. Let's do orange because we see, oh, save your people. He's the strength of his people. We kind of see that idea repeated a couple times as well. And that's based on, that makes sense. I mean, it's based on this here. Because of this, right? God, God is strength. God listens. Therefore, the psalmist then can conclude with this prayer again, save your people. We did notice that. I'll choose I'm running out of colors here, but we still have a couple options left. So he talks about saving your people. He's the saving refuge. Um, so you kind of get a repeated idea here. This sort of breaks down, I think, into two parts again. Um, right? God is the strength, and then maybe the second one we might say God is salvation. You kind of see the two parts there. So, what have we done so far? Well, first of all, we've looked at a pretty good description of why the psalmist is in trouble. And what does he do with that? Well, he cries out to God, and the very prayer itself helps us. It actually gives language to us. It's one of the things that the Psalms do is they actually give us a vocabulary for speaking to God. And we've all been in situations, I think, when other people in our lives are causing us trouble and making life difficult for us. And when that happens, um, it's not uncommon for us to not only want God's help, but also we want God to deal with the people who are causing us trouble, who are cheating us, who are trying to be dishonest with us, who talk nicely to us, but then we find out behind our backs they've been pretty nasty. We've probably all been in situations like that. So what do we do with that? And the psalmist actually shows us how to pray about that. He shows us how to, he leads us to trust that God is a God of justice. But then the answer to prayer gives us assurance. It actually gives us that sense that God does listen to us when we pray and he answers us. And therefore there's that call to trust in him, to look to God because indeed he can save us. Now that's a big picture idea. We've just kind of sketched an outline here. The next step, which we do, and obviously can't do it real well on video, but we dig even deeper yet. We read other thoughts and commentaries on this. We do some internal reflection on it. And we ask that the Holy Spirit would help us to think more deeply about what the text is about and how it might apply to us. And then we're ready for Sunday's message. All right, thanks for watching.